All right, so for our next presenter, they say that co-founder relationships are a little bit like marriages. So the next presenter is very near and dear to my heart. Cliff is the CTO and co-founder of Nori. He is the chief architect behind our Stripe Minions as a service tooling, and he is my second better half after my wife, who's sitting in the front row. Before joining Nori and diving headfirst into the agent dev tool world, Cliff was a member of technical staff at Freestone Grove, and before that, he was a senior engineer at Roche, working in software and healthcare. Cliff.
Thanks, Amol. So we've had a bunch of great talks so far tonight, and thank you to all the presenters so far. Thanks, Amol, for hosting. Thanks, Modal. Maybe just as valuable as the talks tonight, hopefully some conversations you can have with people next to you. So if you can take like 10 seconds, and if everyone can turn to someone you don't know and shake hands and just exchange names, maybe just as valuable as these talks and topics are things you hear about what other people are working on. Great. So, I want to talk a little bit about shipping code fast and verifying your product. So right now, a lot of engineers have probably noticed we're not maybe at the zenith of software quality in our industry. A lot of major info providers have been making their status pages look like the fixings for a stir fry. But more generally, a lot of the tools that we use every day in our editors and in our terminals are shipping with more bugs than we've experienced over the past 2 decades. So rather than putting other companies on blast here, I wanted to start off by showing a bug that we shipped last month. So here's a multi-provider AI CLI that we use every day. There's an issue with one of the agent adapters where sending a prompt and then interrupting and then sending another prompt would silently swallow the next user term. So the interesting part about this isn't that particular bug, it's how asymmetrical it was for us to deal with. I've been thinking about this class of bugs as you just had to be there moments. They're very easy to notice as a user, and sometimes they're oddly tricky for the agent. No matter which model or harness we used, it wasn't able to reproduce this particular failure by just looking at the code, no matter how much we filled it with the correct context about the underlying protocols, even the agent adapter that's running that Claude Code subprocess, just the code was not enough. How many people, just quick show of hands, know what token anxiety is? A couple people? Okay. I know there's a lot of software engineers in this audience, so while we're talking, I'm just going to quick off a quick session. Token anxiety is this idea of, you're paying for this capacity you've reserved and you want to get good use out of it. So let's just come back to that a little bit later. So quick intro, my name's Cliff. As Amol mentioned, I was previously a member of technical staff at Freestone Grove. Before that, staff software engineer at Roche. Very passionate about good developer tools and quality terminal experiences. I've been thinking about those things basically every week for about 10 years. Been loving NeoVim since I was young in high school. Loving Vim since I was young in high school, and delighted with NeoVim and all these other tools that have now had kind of a renaissance in the past 5 years. Our work, we're working on Nori sessions, and for this talk, I want to also call your attention to the other projects that enable that, which are open source, that I'm kind of using as references for this talk. So that brings me to what I want to talk about today, which is think really hard about how you verify your product. And I mean that really literally. If you were to ship something and you wanted to go use your product and verify that it worked, how would you do it? What would you be looking for? And how could you code those steps down? Your agent right now has all sorts of levers you can pull to work really well with code, but a lot less so with the product. So let's set a baseline. I've been thinking about software for the past 20 years as moving in this almost lockstep progression of you ship more features, you accumulate more usage. If anything, this user's hours occasionally goes exponential when you have moments of virality, but eventually plateaus off. So these things tend to be very correlated. And I think that some teams are feeling this hurt in the past year or two because agents have vastly compressed this top portion of how much you're shipping, and the usage hasn't really changed. I don't have quite enough time to go into this slide. I want to keep things moving, but It's in there if you like Foursquare charts. The short version is when it's most tempting to take your hands off the wheel, that's when it can be most difficult for the code base and leave you with work on the back end. So this is the concept that we've been trying to navigate for the past couple months in multiple fully agent-led code bases. I think about tech debt as buying speed today for the optionality of your code base and your products in the future. Verification debt, which all too many of the products in this space have been dealing with, is the quality of the future being the currency for that speed today. So that's the problem. The solution I want to talk about today, this isn't something that we're selling. This isn't something that's going to be one tool or product. This is something that I think is going to be a simple practice that's going to be more like linting or formatting several years from now. In your agents.md, write a section called closing the loop, or how to close the loop. This is a term of art that's kind of been gaining popularity in the past couple months in an area called harness engineering, and basically instructs your agent, after it implements something, how to use the product and see what it just did. So what does that actually look like? How to close the loop? Is this just end-to-end testing with token costs and agents, and you're just reinventing standard engineering practices? No. End-to-end testing is how you're doing this, but the actual practice is a little bit more meaningful than that. Imagine if you took a feature, you took an entire engineering team, and you said they can't use the product at all. Every time they implemented a code change, they had a message that they sent off to the PO saying like, hey, can you try this thing I just implemented? Probably wouldn't be good for velocity. That's the model of work that a lot of your engineers are using right now. They're directing agents through their work, oftentimes many of them in parallel, and then expecting that one single bottleneck is going to be able to validate all the results. Your agents need to use the product itself. So is this just some type of, I have to verify the work up front and then implement it? We're all doing TDD? Not quite. TDD is a way of working. This is just a question you need to ask yourself at the start. If you don't know exactly how you would verify a particular piece of work you want to throw to an agent, maybe stop and think about that as a sign that you should slow down, go very human in the loop on implementation, and then execute that kind of hypothesized verification at the end. And when you codify that, that's when you start seeing the velocity actually uptick. That compounds for all the future work that's going to fall into that type of feature area. So is this just pushing code faster through the same fundamental process? I would say also no. One of the things that I'm most excited about for the next couple of years of using agents is the ways in which they're going to actually change what the tools can do. So asking an agent to use the product and then tell you if something worked might feel like end-to-end testing, but after that, you could say, hey, how was it to use that particular feature? It may or may not have good opinions right now, but that's an entirely new capability that we haven't been able to do with some framework or automation testing before. And I think that everyone who's kind of working on projects or products that are on this idea of a self-driving code base or agent swarms that are going to lead to a software factory, they're going to need to build in these mechanisms. And oftentimes, you'll need to build these mechanisms specific to your products and your projects in order to get that speed up. So if you're not feeling this right now, I'd say file this away for later in the year. A lot of open source projects and most agent-led code bases are feeling this. So I want to draw attention to one of the most cited numbers from the past year of Agentic Dev, which is the meter study on experienced open source software developers. So the long short of it was they thought anecdotally that they had sped up from the agents they were using in the study, and they were moving 19% slower on what they were shipping. To me, that matches the mental model that I've been building, which is you see what was previously the bulk of your work, the actual code, get massively compressed and assume that you saved time. You've actually also created this entirely new category of work on the back end, where you're trying to verify all the outputs, put everything together, rebuild a mental model that you didn't create while doing the work. So as I mentioned, there's this new field and new buzzword this year. Every year has a new AI buzzword, or 5. Agentic engineering, harness engineering. There are a lot of hard problems in harness engineering, particularly in like time-varied domains or distributed systems. For a lot of products, and I would say most code bases, it doesn't need to be complicated. That should be the main takeaway today. In this case, for the bug that we talked about earlier, I'm about to show a Nori session, which is just a cloud micro VM, and using tmux to just puppet the terminal. I just give it a terminal and let it use the app. This should be pretty replicable in most projects. So if you remember the bug from earlier, I don't know exactly how long I've been.
You're good. Don't worry about it.
I did this 3 times yesterday, and it takes about 10 minutes flat. So I'm speaking a little bit too fast, but thankfully I have one saved. So let me introduce you to our sushi-themed robot. With that quick prompt, it recreated the bug using tmux to drive that TUI I showed you earlier. And maybe I don't think it did it right. So here I asked it to give me the actual artifact of the screen. I can see that it had the prompt submitted and nothing following that. So that's the right bug. And then it actually introspected the runtime product state, finds that the wire protocol had this unexpected end turn message here. And it correctly attributes exactly where the unexpected behavior is. It's an underlying Claude agent actor we were using that we had pinned to the wrong version. So about 10 minutes, how long each of those repros took, it was able to find the bug that you can't discover from just runtime or just for the documentation or just for the right context. There's a good saying that a minimal repro is over 50% of the bug fix. So just in that session, if I were to go back to that chat when it pings me, hey, I have the repro, that's the best session, that's the best context window filled up with the right context to fix that particular bug. So if this sounds familiar, you should try this tomorrow. It doesn't need to be complicated. You don't need to pull in 10 different variants for grep from different Twitter posts and recustomize your settings JSON. Just think about how you use your product. Give it tools that the agent was trained on, like Unix utilities, and then make sure that all outputs about the runtime state are legible. Write that down in a markdown file. I'll leave this up during the Q&A if you want to scan it. And we have a couple example skills. So maybe you're not working in terminal tooling, maybe you're building a web app, but we have a skill for that. You can find a lot of good resources online from different creators. I also linked the closed loop example in the repo for that particular bug, and some further reading if you're curious about where this direction of harness engineering is going. Lastly, we think that this type of long horizon work happens best with asynchronous agents that can do this type of work when you're away from your computer. So if you're interested in what we're working on, you can find us at norisessions.com. So thanks everyone.
Well, I have some questions. Okay, so you mentioned that there are some, you mentioned closing the loop, which by the way, totally we use this all the time internally. It makes all of our code way, way, way better. Terminal applications are pretty easy, right? Because the agent knows how to run terminal applications. Can you just talk through, I know you have the skills up there, can you talk through a few of other common mechanisms of for other kinds of projects, people who aren't necessarily building terminal applications, ways or tools that they could use to close the loop?
Yeah, so I would say, first joining the Agentics Slack. I know it's corny, but I think being around a lot of other builders, it's just a good place to get vetted sources for, we've seen a wide variety of quality and skills online. Some frameworks do have much better skills than others. I saw some interesting ones from Airflow that seem to have a pretty good way of navigating the Airflow DAG. So for example, if you're working in data engineering, the TUI with tmux we mentioned, a skill I would love to put together, because we're using Tokyo in the CLI backend, is you can take Tokyo console to deal with some problems of asynchronous runtime, and it can output plain text, it can output kind of a TUI, it can output JSON. I think what it comes down to is that phrase, choosing tools that the agents were trained on and making things plain text. It's really just those two things. So yeah, I think it varies per system. I think that one of the blog posts I linked, I think the Datadog one, goes into some of the tougher systems to make agent legible enough that they can actually go use the product, but they kind of describe in that blog post how they're attacking that problem for their own internal tools.
Hi Cliff, great talk. Wanted to ask, it's kind of stepping into product territory here. As software engineers, we don't particularly always think about product, we're trying to tackle the problems. But wondering how can the product folks get to use and define personas of what actually is the right, can they iterate, can they provide a little bit better skills to close that loop? Like, what does that look like? I feel like that's the question most people are asking, is like what to not build, but what to build.
It's a good question. So I'll say like a caveat first. I think a lot of our customers are software teams, and we're trying to build the tools that make them go faster. And I think what you just asked is to be really important for. There are a lot of products right now that are kind of working on how do you outsource that engineering function and really get products out the other end of prompts. And I'll just be honest, I think that's a really hard problem to do well. I think that maybe unlike a lot of the buzz last year, I think agents actually make developers a lot more valuable, not less. And at least for this year, software engineers are pretty important to get good quality outputs. So I think to your question, I personally feel every day that thinking more about the product side of it, and the engineering side just comes in just as much to validate the outputs and to figure out what good architecture looks like. But I'm being pushed a lot more to think about the product side. I'm sure that people in product feel like they're being pushed more to be more hands-on with actual code outputs because the actual writing of the code is unblocked. But I don't know. I would actually love to talk. If any product people in here who feel like you've had a good breakthrough with your product function, getting more kind of over the fence to actually push the engineers to be thinking about different features, would love to talk more.